So I'd like to call to the order the meeting of the Nagog Hill Orchard Work Group, Ad hoc Orchard Work Group, for May 1st, 2024. We have one member of the work group who's via Zoom, so we need to do a roll call.
Matthew Nordhaus is present.
Brad Mitchell present.
Amy Charlie Lewis present. Jen Clancy present.
Sarah? Did we lose Sarah?
She's, I think,
Do we need
in
to-
Florida.
It's
No.
in and out. She said that she's,
She was on a minute ago,
yep.
or
but
somebody
she
who looked
said
like her. with lovely
it's very
glasses.
sketchy.
Okay.
There's like a big
So-
storm down there.
Okay, well, we have Sarah will be in and out, but we have a quorum, so we can begin. I did not put minutes on the agenda, so we'll start. I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit to the update because I'd like Karen to be here for the RFP timing.
Mhm.
So, update on the building cleanout or the inventory. We had discussions about both for the upper barn and the lower barn. There were some questions about that.
So that was all Sarah.
Yep, she has updates.
Yep,
Okay,
I'm
so we'll
here.
come back to that one when Sarah has a connection again.
She's back. Is she
Oh,
back?
there she is.
There it is.
Yeah, I'm back.
Oh, boy.
This is not gonna,
Hey, Sarah, can you hear us?
she's
Can-
muted.
Yes, can you hear me?
Asked to unmute.
Sarah, we just asked you to
Yeah.
unmute.
I'm not
Yeah, they
muted, you all have me
it doesn't
muted.
change until they do it. I spent last time hitting that over and over
Yeah.
again.
I'm unmuted.
So I don't know if you can hear us, but we need you to unmute.
I'm unmuted.
Still shows you as muted, unfortunately.
No, she's texting. All right, why don't we go to another topic and sort
Okay, I
that. see if
think a
we can
lot
sort
of them are
that out.
hers, but that's
Yeah.
okay. Historic preservation, house deed restriction is something we've discussed. Sarah will talk about the,
Yeah, that's Sarah too.
no, the house deed, the historic restriction's hers, but the deed restriction, I think, is something we haven't fully discussed. We can only put a 30-year restriction on it. If you remember when we started talking about restrictions for the buildings, the goal was to keep it with the farm.
Yep.
DAR has at least verbally agreed to put the barn into the APR, which I think we need to confirm once we get past town meeting date. There's no point in doing it ahead of time. They declined to put the house in, not for great reasons, but one of them was the house was in bad shape and it's kind of hard to argue with. So we can only put a 30-year restriction, is my understanding, associating with that. But I personally, I think that's something we should talk again, wait till after town meeting. I do think that's worth doing, at least for the next 30 years, to try to keep the house with the land.
So even if the historical doesn't, it takes a while, we can sell the house with a deed restriction in
Yeah.
place, right?
Yeah.
And make that condition as part of the.
Yes, and that would be we could associate that with the land, basically say, the lawyers have to make it unreadable, but essentially say you can sell the house separately from the APR land, but it's only good for 30 years.
Okay.
So,
But it would be a bridge until we can get a historical preservation restriction.
well, historic, it achieved something different. Apparently, the historic preservation, the original goal of talking about these restrictions was to keep the house associated with the APR land. The historic preservation can't do that.
Oh,
So we need to talk about something else. APR doesn't want it as part of the permanent restriction, but we can at least get 30 years out of it, and if that's something we choose to do.
have you confirmed it's 30 years, or we think it's 30 years?
I've had people tell me that. I haven't confirmed it, but I believe it's 30 years. APR and some of the conservations, they've got footings in state law that basically let them go in perpetuity, but that's not universal. So, did we get Karen off of mute yet?
Yeah, I made her co-host.
Okay. Hey, Karen, so we talked a little bit about the restriction on the house, but I don't know if you wanted to talk about the historic restriction. Sarah, I'm sorry.
She's gone. I think I have to make her co-host every time.
Time's been great. She does have a couple questions for us. Can you all hear me?
All right, Sarah, your co-host.
It's saying she's connecting to audio, so I think she's probably got some. Sarah, sometimes it helps if you shut down your video. At least that's what they tell me.
Yeah.
Let's bandwidth. It does work.
Can you hear me?
Okay, well, why don't we come back to Sarah and maybe once she speaks up, but we had skipped the first agenda item Karen, which I think was largely yours, which was discussion of the timing of the RFP. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Using the owl?
I don't know how, I mean, I'm trying to do different things to see how we can get the audio to work. Oh, here we go. Now let's try it. That way, I just set the owl to be the speaker. Okay, so that, we know that works.
Can you hear us now?
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you.
Woo-hoo.
Yay.
That's why you're on the floor.
The owl has landed. All right, so you
Okay,
have Vin and Sarah here. So I'm just on phone, camera off.
Okay, so let's go back to the top of the agenda. We had the RFP timing, which there was some question whether we could start before July 1. We can. Next was an update on the building cleanout and the inventory that a couple of people had asked about,
Okay.
so we could get her in the lower barn. And Sarah, I'm told you may have some information on that.
Yes, great. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
Yeah.
perfectly.
Okay, perfect. So my last correspondence with Jim was also CC'd with Karen and Matthew. We have, we've been forwarded a release, which means that it's very similar to the lease that we had, release that we used when we were cleaning physically the orchard. It's just a waiver. So I sent Jim the inventory from when we purchased the farm from 1999. And so the upper barn has majority of small implement farm items and a lot of old furniture. So I stated that the furniture was not part of the initial inventory, so doesn't need to be marked as surplus. The only thing that we're trying to get rid of is some of the old furniture. And so I had asked Jim to meet, our last email was on April 4th. I had asked to meet on the following Monday with no response. We're still happy to clean up. I believe some of it might have to be deemed surplus inventory, even though it was not on the inventory. So I'm still working on that. I think after we get through the town meeting, we'll figure out how is best to inventory and get rid of some of the items that are not owned. They were part of Charles's house or tenants, and so was just left behind. So that's the update on the inventory and the clean out.
Okay, so ongoing. We had talked about the preservation restrictions. I mentioned the deed restriction, and essentially we had, it's only good for 30 years, but assuming we pass town meeting, we will look into that to try to associate the house with the land. I don't think we can do that with historic preservation, but Sarah, you wanted to discuss that historic preservation restriction.
Yes, and so shout out goes to Linda Stein for continuing to support this project. And so she has been in communication with the Mass Historical Commission, and so there are questions coming back to this committee. If we're looking just right now for number 74, which is the house, do we want to put it in both a deed restriction and either also a historical preservation restriction? As we know, we don't have a historic district designation. So we have to understand if we want to do both. So if we want to do a deed and the restriction, we need to ask Massachusetts Historical Commission if we can do that. So I would like to let Linda go ahead and do that. Also, she's curious what we would want in the deed, and I don't know that we have to get into that just yet. When you look, I feel as though we're on good grounds for historic. The house did burn in and was rebuilt in the 1930s, but it dates far back to that. In regards to the lower barn, so presently you have 91 and 94 Nagog Hill Road are already in Macris. They're called the William and Nancy Rhodes House and Barn, but they don't currently have protection of a historic preservation restriction or historic district, and I'm reading this verbatim from Linda. So it's fascinating. You can go down a rabbit hole in terms of the information that's in the library, valuations dated back to 1890, the livestock that was in the lower barn, horses, swines, bulls, cows, colts. So I'm happy to look at that as well. We just need to give some guidance of what we would like to do. Our focus obviously potentially would be in the house first. And I'm at your leisure to understand what you'd like to do.
So for the deed restriction, it'd be very simple, a 30-year restriction where the house couldn't be sold separately from the APR land, which I don't think would conflict with the historic restriction any more than a right-of-way or something would. I guess I had one question about the historic restriction. What are they going to be restricted to?
I think, so my understanding is that Littleton does not have a very stringent policy, and it basically, if you were to tear it down, there's a waiting period of, I believe, up to 1 year. Please do not quote me on this because I am
No, that's
not
correct.
familiar with demolition. So I think it's not going to ultimately preclude you from potentially taking it down, but it does slow the process in terms of really seeing if that's the best use for that property.
Right. No, but a historic restriction would go beyond the Littleton bylaws, correct?
That part I would have to ask Linda whether it would be in Macris, so that would be the Commonwealth and the town of Littleton.
So basically, what would happen is we would find someone to hold the restriction, and they would be in charge of enforcing whatever the terms of the restriction are. So in the case of the Robinson Roadhouse, we wrote up a restriction that included the outer envelope and some of the beams and some of the chimneys inside it, because those were very old and historical.
Yep.
And we hired someone to ensure that as the construction went on, they would monitor it and make sure those weren't disturbed, and then there was an annual process of reviewing it. So I think that to some extent, it's up to us to decide what we want to put into that restriction, but we will have to find someone to hold the restriction and enforce it in perpetuity.
So we can tailor it to our needs, and I'm partially playing devil's advocate here, but, put some restrictions on the property if our intention is to really keep it as a farmhouse. I think we need to consider what a future farmer may want to do with that property. Do they want to subdivide the interior of the house to have, worker housing or something like that? I think, anyway, just putting that up for discussion. I'm not arguing one way or the other
Right.
at this point, but
Yep. So let me circle back to Linda. As we all know, the house is rated for septic system of seven bedrooms, but let me circle back with her. The lower barn definitely has historic significance. And so if we were to have further restrictions on the lower barn, we'd want to talk to that similar to the road house as well. So I'm happy to go back to Linda and also state that it doesn't conflict, that we can have dual purpose of a 30-year deed restriction and also have some form of historic restriction. And what does that look like?
Okay. Before you go back, does anybody on the board have any thoughts on what kind of restrictions we want on the house?
So I just have a question. So wouldn't it be that, and maybe Sarah, this is a question for the Historical Commission, wouldn't it be the state or the town that holds the restriction, or do we have to find like some other outside entity?
I don't believe you have to find an outside entity, but I will confirm that.
You can't enforce yourself, but we're talking about selling the house.
Right.
So for the barn, we need
Right.
somebody
So
outside.
we could hold it, but we just have to commit to holding it forever.
Right.
Like, the town could be the holder of the restriction.
But not the lower barn, because we would own that.
Correct, that's right.
Right,
We'd have
we'd
to
have to
find someone
find-
outside the town to hold the
Yeah.
restriction.
And just so that I'm clear, so we can put a historical restriction on the house,
Mhm.
but in terms of sort of like strengthening the restrictions, it's only if the house is sold that we can, restrict it even further through the deed. Is that my correct
The
understanding?
deed restriction would basically say for 30 years that you couldn't sell it separately from the APR land, and that would run out in 30 years.
Correct.
So then how
Yeah,
do we
correct.
get it? And that's the most we can potentially do.
That's the most we can do.
Can we
Okay.
put a right of first refusal into
We
it?
could put a right of first refusal. I don't know if that would go more than 30 years as well.
Can you kind of re-up after 30 years, or is there a way to maybe file something to
At
extend
that
that
point, it's
30
owned by
years?
somebody else. I
So
mean, we
they
put
would
a
have to-
restriction
so they
when
would
we
have
own
to-
it, so
they
they'd have to
could do
agree.
it.
They could agree to another 30 years, but we couldn't enforce that.
Right.
30 years from now, they'd have to agree.
And I think that
So-
that can be a question for council,
Yeah, agreed.
if
Yeah,
you can
and
go
so-
more than 30.
Sorry. So just in terms of people who have concerns about if we like lease it or sell it, it doesn't matter if we lease, like, there's no difference if we lease or sell the property, because the historical restriction is only going to be for 30 years.
No, the historical restriction, my understanding is can go on
Yeah.
in perpetuity.
Yeah.
It's just the deed restriction associating with the APR land is only good for 30 years. Because the historic restriction can't do that, DAR won't take it as part of APR.
So the worst case would be after 31 years, someone sells it, and it's separate from the farm, but they still are restricted by the historical restriction. And if we say you can't change the outer envelope of the house, so it can't look any different, they could remodel the inside, but they couldn't change the way it looks. They couldn't subdivide, they couldn't put up condos.
I'm sorry, if we sold it, then you could restrict it for at least 30 years, so it wouldn't be sold off.
Well, they could still sell it, just not separately from the APR land.
Okay, so there's no difference between leasing to a farmer or selling to a farmer in terms of this house
For 30 years.
for 30 years.
But then,
So it has
There's a
protection for
difference.
30 years if it's leased or sold.
Well, at least we own it, so we
Yeah,
could
at least it's
keep
protected.
whatever restrictions we want on it as owners.
in that sense. At least it's protected in the sense that nothing could happen to it without the town's permission. But once we sell it, our influence, so to speak, ends after 30 years.
Okay, thank you. for the
Except with historic,
clarification.
if we put a historic, that's
Correct.
in perpetuity.
Yep.
Which I had a question for you, sir, if you don't mind. So on the historic preservation restriction, that cannot tie to the land at all, correct? It's just the building?
That part, I don't know if it would encompass the footprint. I thought it could encompass some of the footprint. I will confirm that.
I think it can encompass the footprint of the building, but not necessarily the land.
Okay, and
Or if the land that goes with it, but we couldn't tie it to the APR, sorry.
that's okay. How big is that parcel then?
About an acre.
A little bit over an acre. Yeah, you definitely cannot tie it to APR.
Yeah. And they couldn't subdivide it, even under zoning, I don't believe. The parcel.
It's a little over 1 acre, so.
Yeah, I would just, I think, so one of my primary concerns is making sure that even if we get the house protected with restrictions, that the rest of that lot is restricted to the extent that we can make it so. I would hate to
Okay.
see something else get put onto that lot.
Let
So I
me
think we just need to
look
keep that
into
in
that.
mind. Yeah,
Okay.
That's a zoning planning question, I think, more than anything else. Like if there's a house on a 1 acre lot, we have 1 acre zoning, someone can't build 2 houses on it or subdivide that property. So, you know, they could rebuild the house, but then if the house is covered by a historical preservation restriction, they can't do that either. But I mean, so I think that your question about, you know, making sure that the land is protected is to some extent covered by the zoning of the land.
But I seem to remember, and we should double check, the lady from the Historical Society who came in said at least the house lot, the house is associated with it. So you can't build condos right up next to it and ruin that. But we couldn't tie it to the APR.
all right.
And I guess, sort of my thoughts are.
I'll confirm that. Yep. I'll confirm
Yeah,
that.
my
with
thoughts are, what do we want this restriction to look like? You know, what are we trying to preserve here? I'd like to leave it open so the farmer can do within reason what they need to do to be able to use it for farming purposes.
I agree.
But I'm not sure what the restriction would look like beyond that.
Okay,
Yeah, they need to
that gives me something to work with.
themselves, or-
Yeah, I think if we kept it to the original footprint,
Yeah, the footprint.
right, which would make sense given that it's the foundation that has the most value.
Don, briefly, please.
Sure. Don McIver, 43 Foster Street. To address the preservation going through Mass Historical Commission, what other communities have found useful is that given it takes such a long time getting that preservation restriction put in place, you know, certainly do that, but in the deed for the house, you can also put in a clause that simulates what Mass Historical Commission can do, but also put in a statement that it gets extinguished when the actual Mass Historical Commission designation gets put in place.
Okay, I think we'll leave that to the attorneys. I think we can always also make the historical restriction a condition of the purchase and sales. The attorneys will take care of all that.
But that's
So can I just add one thing? So I just would like to have some guidance for Linda, because this is a long process and we still have to have an expert come up and look at the house to deem it that it is historic. So I would like some guidance from this group if I can go forward with, we are looking to explore putting a historic restriction on the house. And we're just talking right now about the house. We can deal with the barn and other things later so that we can get the ball rolling to have them come in and start to assess the historic value of the building.
Should we do a motion to allow allow Sarah to move forward with that, exploring that?
Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay, so I move that we designate Sarah Seward to investigate the, putting a historical preservation restriction on the 74 Nagog Hill Road.
I second it.
Okay, we need a voice call vote. Karen?
Karen, I.
Matthew, I.
Brad, aye.
Amy Charlo Lewis, aye.
Jen Clancy, aye.
Sarah?
Sarah Seward, aye.
Okay. And again, I think when you speak to her, you can reflect that we don't want to hinder the farmer unduly and be able to use that house as they see fit.
Yep.
Okay.
And duly noted that we want the building to either be for housing or farming purposes. Yep.
Right. We have to determine what unduly is at some point, but I think we've got that.
Great.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, building cleanup we did. Next one, we have update on the shed maintenance. Motion passes, by the way.
Yeah.
So. So we had some sheds that we had some neighbors complaining they were kind of an attractive nuisance and perhaps not safe. We can put it up till next meeting as well.
I didn't follow up on it, and it may have been me that was supposed to.
Shed caved in, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there was concern about children getting into it. I think Ryan suggested perhaps we just at least put in some
Tape.
like fencing, like snow fencing, drift fencing.
It's mostly that upper one, closest to the road,
Yeah.
where the back blew down.
Okay.
Where they have the pick your own,
Yes.
where you get the bags.
Yep.
Yeah.
So Sarah, isn't that on the punch list that we gave to the highway department to deal with?
It
That was
is,
short
but
enough.
let me, I can right after town meeting, let me meet with the town and see what we can do. I would like to put some no trespassing signs up by some of the buildings, which there is not signage presently. So I'm happy to take that on.
Okay.
Okay. Next item is we have town meeting prep.
Yeah, so I did send around the PowerPoint. I'm very interested in hearing feedback on it. Sarah had some good comments on adding financials. But Sarah, I wonder if you could extrapolate on that, expand on that a bit more.
Yep, for sure. And I wasn't sure, I also gave Jen some of my comments because I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to get a good
Okay.
signal to call in. I think in the timeline that Jen had presented before, and also George Sanderson at the last meeting, I think that I would love to see it on page 2, where you have an outline and really put that foremost of a history of when, because there's going to be a lot of people hopefully at the town meeting that are not familiar with when it was purchased, what we paid, what it was the discounted rate, what we got for grants, so people understand like what our in value was. And here again, trying to prove that we don't have money to support the future running of the orchard from a town standpoint.
Okay, good, thank you, I can do that.
So the other thing I had, it may or may not make sense, was if you look at what we paid for it versus what the land best appraisal goes, there's a big difference.
Mhm.
I think folks need to understand that that's the development rights that we purchased,
Yep.
because that may not be
yeah.
immediately clear to people.
Do you have those numbers somewhere I can find?
It's in the timeline.
Yep, Jen, they're right on the
Is it-
timeline.
Yeah, they're right on the
All right,
timeline.
okay, good,
Yep,
thank you. The long document you wrote?
yep,
Okay. Okay, thank you.
towards the beginning.
I'll check that out. Great. Okay. I also thought there are a lot of potential questions that we could address up front. I don't want to make this presentation too long, but I do want to make sure that the most likely sticking points at town meeting are addressed in my presentation to sort of try to forestall some of the people who are saying we have to lease it, for example, if those going to come up. So I'm interested in hearing what.
Matthew,
Yeah.
can we go slide by slide? Because I think you did a wonderful job in
Sure.
outlining it, and I don't think it's too long. But is it easier for us just to go through and do edits of the whole presentation and see if there's something that you want to withdraw or add?
Absolutely. So,
Can we share screen?
I can, actually, do you want me to join? And I can actually share
Are you
my
online?
computer.
It'd
I
be
can-
helpful
I can
if
join.
people online is in the audience, if we can share it.
Oh, yeah, okay.
If it turns into a hassle, we'll go back to
No, I
them.
can do that. Give me a second to join this.
We should be able to do that.
Give me a
You
second.
can share one.
Okay, guys, intermission while we get the screen up.
So I think, Matt, you have to,
You can make me a. you can make me a
Matthew has
host.
to do a
Make my
screen
co-host.
share.
Yeah, and then you can make me a host.
yeah, but you're not in Zoom.
I'm about to get in.
And there you are.
Let me know. I let the host know that I'm here.
Okay, and so
Recording in
now
progress.
Okay,
I can make you a co-host.
great. Oh, I'm a co-host. Okay, share screen. Look at that. How's that?
Oh, Slick,
Okay.
Nice.
Okay,
can we still hear Sarah that she's not a co-host?
she's a co-host
I'm
too.
good if you
Okay.
take me off co-host.
As long as we can hear you.
All right,
Yeah.
let me get this out of the way. Okay, so first slide, welcome to the presentation, the agenda. Who are we? How did we get where we are today? What have we learned in our process? What's the article about, and common questions and concerns? I tried to make this slide about the membership to focus a bit on the expertise that we have. I think people aren't aware. You know, we have commercial farmers, we have nonprofit farmers, we have policy wonks, we have contract lawyers. I mean, we're a pretty impressive group, and I want to make sure everybody knows that.
I would add that we have abutters.
Oh, that's a good
Yeah.
call.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because Sarah and Jen are both the butters.
Oh, and I can't edit this because I'm not official. Sorry, give me a second.
You want me to take a note for you?
So
No, I can't.
while we're doing this, can I throw in a few edits?
Absolutely.
So I feel that we have some members that weren't at the very beginning on 21, so I think it would be great so that they don't get some negative feedback that we write the group has 7 current members because Matthew, Karen, Brad back in 21 weren't on it. So I think I'd like to add the word current.
Got it. Okay.
That's my only edit to slide 3. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else on this page, or we'll move on? So this was a very, very quick version of the timeline. RFP 1, there was one response, which I recall was Charlie's son. And it was not a complete, then RFP 2 was Storm Along. I didn't realize we negotiated all the way through the beginning of 23, which is crazy, but we did.
Oh, can I just stop you there? So we issued the first RFP in February of 22.
Okay,
It went out on Comms By and a few other like free places, and we got 0 responses.
oh, okay.
So we put it out a second time, and then we only got 1 response.
And so the second one was March,
Yeah, the second one was March.
and that was the one that Charlie's son responded to?
No, that
No, so there were 3, was 3 times. To
Right,
Charlie's son, then
No response.
no response. The second time, we put it out in February of 22,
oh, okay,
no response, no applications came in.
got it,
So we put it out again, and that's when we got Storm Along.
got it. And when was the very first one that you got Charlie's response? Charlie's
That
son?
was predated this,
This group, that was
yeah.
2020 or something?
2021.
Okay,
You'd have to find out from the people who are
Okay.
involved in evicting
that's fine.
Mr. Ocker.
I'll sort it out, okay.
So, and I know I'm gonna kind of jump ahead, but the thoughts in my head, I don't want to lose it.
Are we still on this slide?
Yes.
Amy was gonna jump ahead, but do you want to continue this?
Yeah, I don't want to jump, I just want to like tie in a thing. So I think, it's important to note in the presentation that we've put this out 3 times
Mm-hmm,
as a lease.
mm-hmm,
We only got 1 response. And when we put out the RFI, it was because people, and it's true, and I've said it, that the first RFP that this group put together, when it was Jen, Sarah, myself, and Bill Pickard, was very cumbersome, right? And so people were saying, well, it was really cumbersome, so you should go rewrite it and put it out as a lease again, and sort of like do your due diligence on that. But I think it's important to note in the presentation that we do the town that we did an RFI, which was non-binding. It had like 4 questions. It was super broad. You didn't have to put like any real detail, right? It was general stuff. And people could have a choice between telling us, do you want to lease it or selling it? So bringing the process back to the very beginning, where we only put it out as a lease using a much simpler RFI, really won't change anything.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So then maybe it's an request for proposal to lease is issued, request for proposal to lease reissued.
That's what I was going to put in there. Yeah.
And then in summer 2023, the working group decides to issue a request for information to learn about who is interested in the property, how they would use it, probably adds a new line, which is a spacing issue, and whether they want to purchase or lease.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I mean, I can say that and not put it in the slide.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm worried about text overload and time. But so your point is well taken.
Yeah. And this may be the next, sorry, go ahead.
So I would clarify, to learn how people,
To learn how.
to learn who is interested in the property. Just when I first read it, I thought it was more about like residents at large, like how they
Who
would.
is, okay, that's good, okay.
This may be jumping ahead, but one of the social media posts you forwarded me, somebody accused us of lying and saying we didn't get any people leases. I think what was said was none of the people we determined were viable wanted to lease. I don't think we were saying.
I
think
did
there
say
was,
that.
You
yeah,
you
there was
addressed
one
that.
viable, there was one on the bubble, I think,
Yeah.
for some people.
There was one that I
That
thought
was
was
to
qualified
lease,
that was leased,
but
but your point is.
again,
it's
on the
not.
bubble.
But that entity wanted the town to fully pay for everything that needed to get done.
That's
So we're
why I
talking
marked
about
it as
millions of
unviable.
dollars that the town would invest in someone else's business.
Got it, right, okay.
Yeah, Amy, I think that's a really, really great piece to really let people know that everything that ever went out in the beginning was lease only.
Yeah, I'll add that to that slide, that's a good call. So what have we learned? We got a lot of responses, they were varied and quite diverse. We agreed there were 5 or 6 that were very highly qualified. All of those proposed purchasing the orchard, and all of those also proposed a diverse use of the property, which included sometimes fruit trees, vegetable crops, animals, and alternative sources of income. And as a result of that information that we got from the RFI, we decided to issue an RFP for purchase.
I have two suggestions.
Yeah,
So on line
Go
2,
ahead,
if I may, we're on line 2 where it says working group agreed. There were approximately 5 to 6 that represented highly qualified. I would like to insert the word potentially, so it states that represented potentially highly qualified applicants.
got it.
Because we don't
Yep.
know how qualified they were. And then one point I didn't see, which I thought was really a turning point for us, is that we learned from council only recently that we had to pick one or the other, that it had to be for an RFP, it had to be for lease or for purchase, that we could not do both. So it couldn't
Got
be
it.
an either or. So I would suggest inserting something that says council stated, basically, it had to be a purchase or a lease.
Got it, will do.
Joanne?
So just a point, I've made a lot of these in my career. There's way too many words on these slides. Each one of these 1, 2, 3, 4 bullets have 5 or 6 words. Like the first bullet, you could say first RFI, many different approaches.
Yeah,
The
okay,
rest of that is all what the speaker should say.
okay.
Like no, people's eyes will glaze over.
So,
And the other slide's the same. It needs to be much pared back.
so normally I would agree with you, Joanne, 100%. I was thinking the same thing, and then I realized that this is going to be part of the public record. And so I think additional detail
But-
is important.
Every slide has a little notes section. put all that detail in the notes section. People who go through and look at the slides, they can click down to the notes and see all of that. But when you're projecting this at town meeting, yeesh,
Okay, well,
just.
Matthew's the author, so I'm sure he'll take that into consideration.
I will, your point is well taken, so.
So item 4, the only thing that I would say was, I'm not sure they all had incredibly diverse uses. There's one I thought was pretty good that was really focused on nursery stock without a lot of arts and
Yeah.
crafts and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I think there were a lot of diverse, but I don't think they all
I
had
could
that,
put most, maybe.
or many.
So I want people to not be surprised that it isn't gonna be a pure orchard.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, instead of all, I think you could just say the highly qualified submissions proposed a diverse use of the property
And I
that
don't think,
included.
I don't think most of them
vegetable
included
crops,
orchards, so we've never really compared notes to
Only
figure,
only one of them.
one of them included an orchard, right?
Yeah.
And that was only partial property.
I found several of them said, like, they would keep some fruit trees along the road, though, for example.
Well, we've really never compared to the 4 or 5 or 6 that we thought were particularly viable on the surface, but
Yeah.
the ones I looked at, there was only one that was talking tree fruit.
Yeah, and so Matt, I think it's like really also important to state that it's the farmers that told us they wanted to purchase. And a document that had a very, very low threshold to meet, that was non-binding, the market told us what people wanted. And the reason why farmers want to own farmland is because like less than 2% of people own like $3.2 trillion worth of farmland in this country.
Okay.
Farmers need farmland, and again, it's what owning farmland is what really separates the people who ultimately do well and those who don't.
Yeah,
And
That's why we put this into APR, not conservation, right? I mean, this is APR, it's supposed to be
There's some ownership.
agricultural
Yeah.
use.
okay.
And they
But
retained
that's
some of the
also with
capital.
that was the Morrison's wishes, was for it to remain in ag as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So an explanation of specifically what the article says, which it gives the select board permission to declare the property surplus, issue an RFP for sale, and negotiate the sale of the ag restricted parcels. And I will include the map, which shows which of the parcels are ag restricted. I went back and forth on having all the details about the parcels that are the house and the barn. I'm worried that's gonna get into the weeds and get too long and long-winded, so I left it out.
But I don't think we can say we're selling the ag-restricted parcels only. We're including potentially the house and the barn, which are not ag-restricted.
Right, we have a verbal commitment on the house to be put in ag restriction, not the house. The barn, yeah, sorry.
No, the barn.
So the other thing, and I wouldn't put this in there, just be ready, there's gonna be somebody who looked at the map, the house and the barn are still, as far as the assessor's map, part of 105 and 104,
I know,
but if they bring it up,
but
just be
they're carved
aware.
out of the APR.
They're
so-
carved out of the APR.
So this says APR.
Yep, just-
Understood.
Not putting it in there, but be ready for, there's always one.
I'll think about this again and see whether.
Can I ask a quick question? And
Yeah.
is it worth just, and I know we're getting in the weeds here, but is it worth to write barn and house so that people know that that blank space on the left is the barn and the blank space on the right is the house?
Sure. I
Because
can
we
put
have
that
some
in there,
people
yeah.
that are new to town.
Yeah, okay.
We're doing Orient well enough, so it took me a couple minutes there.
Really, I tried to make it as simple as I could.
No, you did a great job, your
All right.
shortcomings mine, not yours.
Okay, yes, good call. I'll put those in, Sarah.
Joanne?
Lower
Thank you.
barn also be barn?
That's not part of the
No,
APR.
nothing.
Let's leave that off.
yeah, we're really focusing it on the APR land. If they
And the
want
house
to
and all.
lease it, and that's an additional thing, that's like a separate conversation, because that sits on conservation land.
And we're proposing to sell the orchard, the house, and the upper barn, so that's what we're focused on.
Can I ask a question? Have we, prior to this slide, mentioned how many acres? This might be a good little spot to just put a star that says, 48 plus acres. Because I don't
Sure.
think that we have in the slide previously.
Got it.
I don't think you need to break it down per parcel.
No, I'll just put a note on the.
No, just total.
Yeah.
Total.
Yeah, totally. Okay.
Yeah, because I think there's also a lot of confusion around like the whole, like people think the whole property's for sale, and I think we need to really clarify, like, out of the 124,
Well, and
it's just the 40.
And that's why I marked this the way I did, yeah.
No, that's good.
So then the rest of these, we don't need to get into the specifics of these, but because there's a lot of like there's gonna be a lot of word crafting on these, what I'd like to focus on is what questions would we like to put on, and I think there should be no more than 5, and probably fewer would be better. The most like impactful, likely questions that we're going to get that are the ones that we want to answer first. These are the 4 I picked, but I'm happy to hear other, you know, one that I've heard is how much will it cost to run the orchard if the town keeps it? Which is a good question, and I don't know the answer to that necessarily.
I think it was like $40,000 an acre, isn't that what?
So that was to replant apple trees, but I think it's safe to say it's between $1.5 and $2 million of inputs to bring that up to speed again, at least as an orchard.
Of initial investment, yeah.
Yeah, so to fix the house, the barn, to take down the trees and put in new trees, if you went that way, would be between 1.5 and 2 million.
And that would include irrigation as well.
Yeah, but again, this is assuming high-density orchard apple trees, but yes.
Got it.
Right.
So are there other questions? Joanne?
I think those
So
questions
Matthew,
are good.
Yeah.
Can I just ask a question? Matthew, are you saying in addition to the 4 that you already have as questions and concerns, are you adding into that slide number 7?
I'm saying I want to put no more than 5, and these might be the right questions, or there might be others that are better, or maybe
Okay.
we only have
Got it.
3 that are good. I'm flexible.
I think you
Okay,
hit the top
thank you.
one myself. Joanne?
Okay.
I think they're good questions. The second one where it says, why can't the town retain ownership and lease it? It took me many meetings to figure out what you were saying, that the going rate, it's because it's municipally owned, because the municipality would still own it, that you can't just pay,
Right.
you know, whatever will.
Here's the answer, money.
Right,
Yeah.
Capital
right, but like,
improvements.
no one said it's because it's municipally owned. They said we'd have to pay the going rate or something like that.
Yeah, prevailing
Make it
wage.
really
prevailing
clear
Okay,
rates
I
to
can put,
be-
that
okay,
it's,
yeah,
you don't have to write it up there,
Further
but when
explain
somebody
if
asks
we
that
do
question, I
comes
would
up.
make it clear that's why. It's because
Well, we're gonna
it's
ask it,
municipally
I
owned.
think
You
we've
got
got to
no
answer it
choice.
on the slide.
Yeah, and then, I know this is like a supercharged like answer, but I feel like we don't talk about it enough in agriculture. It's like, you know, this is like many places we abuse people in agriculture all the time. And it's because you can't, like, when you own that much land, it's like how you can't pay people
yeah.
like a ton of money because you can't make it profitable. And that's like, you know, well,
Well, there's not much return in agriculture as it boils down.
Yeah.
We have policies that keep food cheap in this country.
yeah. So, and,
Can I ask a quick question? Is it worth
Yeah.
putting, and I don't know what a carpenter prevailing wage would be, is it worth just, at least for us, our own edification of knowing what the prevailing wage is?
The rule of thumb that I've heard from Ryan is that it's roughly twice what a private entity or a commercial builder would pay. So if you're paying $100 a square foot for a renovation, the town would be paying $200 a square foot. And I can mention that in the, while I'm talking.
Yeah, I think people always think about hourly wage, so that's why I'm curious,
Do it
like,
that way too,
what
sure.
what a construction carpenter would make.
So it's the difference between a union carpenter and a non-union carpenter.
Yep, something,
And
yeah.
I think you can probably figure out what, I don't know what a union carpenter makes, but I bet it's more than a guy with a truck who's driving around doing carpentry jobs.
It's probably double what you're gonna pay for.
yeah, and then that would just crush them. Like they would never get off the ground.
Of course.
So I've got a question too, because so many people will be at town meeting who have not followed this process. And when people have approached me, I still get the question, can condos be put up there?
Okay, so
So I don't know how we phrase that, but that's a big
First
fear.
question.
So, well, this is kind of the first question. So here it is. What is an APR? It's a binding agreement. The land can only be used for agriculture. It's forever. It runs with the land and binds all future owners, no matter who owns it. It will have to be under agriculture. And then here's the process for releasing lands. Town meeting approval, land swap act, a literal act of Congress. Yes.
Legislature.
It's both, there's
Can
two
I-
votes.
Yeah,
Can I add something above the town meeting where at your second sentence says expensive and very rare? I'd like to insert
Yeah.
Article 97.
just as a
And then
note.
here again, And then also, we reference 50 acres. I'd really like to not use the 50-acre number. I'd like to do like a plus minus of like 48, or because it's technically like 49, but if we
Okay.
could put like 40 something, because 50 is actually over what we're selling.
Got it. Okay. I'll put that in.
But I think Article 97, I think, is important.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was just done in 2023 to strengthen the APR.
But that's
Right.
nothing that we,
It should say an act of the legislature, Congress is.
act of the legislature. Okay.
Yeah, and just to go back to the questions and concerns, I don't know if we want to talk about, we know why farmland ownership is preferred by farmers, which is what they told us. I don't know if that's.
Well, I mean, I think we covered that when we talk about why we decided on not on a lease.
Do we want to go back to my earlier point of, why we're not going to circle back to starting this? Like, if you vote no, we're still not going to circle back to creating an RFP for a lease, because we already did that 3 times. And the market said farmers want farmland ownership because.
Yeah, so I have what happens if the vote doesn't pass, and it looks like I didn't write the answer to that, but I could put that in as,
Yeah.
we're gonna start over with another RFP for purchase.
Shouldn't we be following the direction of the select board at that point?
If it doesn't pass?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know what we would go back to.
I mean, we've already demonstrated that a lease isn't viable,
Yeah.
but I mean, I do think the select board has to make
I
that
mean,
decision.
at some point, we just have to have that conversation on the floor of the, I mean, I don't, that's a good point, but, I guess I would think that would be something that we would say in response to someone saying, we have to lease it.
I mean, like, we'd still have all
Amy,
the pragmatic criteria, we'd still include community input. Like, I don't know what we would go back to.
Right, agreed. I mean, I think
Okay,
that
but
can be a
Amy,
good
Amy, I
answer.
don't think, yeah, you can't be absolute that we would not go back to a lease. We don't know that. So granted, it's probably not what we prefer, but I don't think that we can state that. I think that I agree with Brad and others that it would really, we would be beholden to the select board's direction.
Yeah.
I think, I wouldn't put it on the slide, but I think it's worth saying when you're up there, but we're still gonna face all the barriers that we had that brought us to this
Yeah,
place
that's
in the
right,
first
that's
place.
right.
Right, I think the market's not gonna change.
Kristen's been super patient.
Right.
I'm Kristen, sorry.
Okay.
You're too polite, I didn't see you.
I forget, it was on the previous slide where, you said that it can only be used for agriculture. I just want to make sure that you guys don't get backlash from this if for some reason the person you select ends up putting weddings and using it for weddings, because isn't it only, it's 50% of the land has to be used for agriculture? And then, even though it's APR, but then if they wanted to get special permits.
They'd need a special
other things-
permit for a non-ag or a quasi-ag activity, and DAR wouldn't give it for weddings.
Okay, well, for whatever, but if it was used, that wasn't used for agriculture, because they can apply for a permit. So I just don't know if that's, I mean, it's not up to the town to make that permit, it's up to the state to do that permit.
But they've been pretty strict about agriculture, like agriculture is agriculture, and
Okay.
it covers a lot of stuff, but they're not letting people build farm-to-table restaurants with giant parking lots on the ag
Yeah,
land.
they tried once.
They-
Yeah.
No, where I've seen special permits, we have one grower, for instance, who had this challenge road race through the fields. And at first they said no, and once a year, they give them a permit to do that.
Right.
Like a Spartan race or.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was, yeah.
That's actually a clever use of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But just because when I, on the state website for the APR, they've got the packet for somebody that's applying, and it explains all the different permit process if you want to do something different or anything like that. So I
Yeah.
just,
There's also zoning restrictions on how much non-agricultural income you can have on a farm in
Right.
state law as well.
I just don't want to get into the little bits of like all the edge cases, because like that's.
No, we don't want to put it on the slide.
That's going to derail us at town meeting. right?
yeah, I think so,
Okay,
but I just,
okay. So does anyone have any questions that they think needs to go on this slide that we need to answer up front?
I don't know if we want to answer this, but when people, this keeps coming up, why can't it just stay as an orchard? Like, just an orchard.
So,
why do we have to do anything?
yeah, that's one. Why can't we just let it grow up into trees?
Does that
Yeah.
touch on the same question?
No, it's a
Yeah.
little bit different. I think some people want to keep it an orchard, and that you
Yeah,
have to
that's
leave
not-
up to the farmer on how they think they can make money and play to their skills in the market and that sort of thing. The other one I had is, well, let's just let it grow up into trees and not do anything with it, which is a violation of the APR.
So we did get an email today, the select board got an email out for someone asking about wilderness farming. And, so I think someone's gonna say that at town meeting.
So,
But that's not a Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources recognized agricultural use.
no, and even
Like
if
forestry.
you could do forestry, but you need a forest management plan, it would have to be real forestry.
Got it, okay. So it would have to be a managed forest.
Right, and it would literally need a forest management plan.
Okay. So apple trees wouldn't do it.
I mean, the farmer could come in and do it, but neglecting apple trees for 20 years isn't gonna cut it.
Okay, okay. Sarah, do you have any other questions you think are burning a hole in your pocket, as it were?
No, I think, honestly, it comes back to the beginning that people have to know how much it's going to cost to bring this back into any type of a viable farming operation.
Yeah,
So, I mean, if people are looking at apple trees, then we have to rip everything out, and, yeah, I just think people need to really know what, and Brad had, said, 1.5 to 2. I mean, people just have to know, like, we are fallow. So,
And I
yeah.
think it's worth pointing out that not many people are gonna invest that kind of money on rented land.
right, that's right.
Well, and not many towns can afford that.
Yeah, that's true too.
Because, this might be the initial investment, but you're still on the hook every year. And if they say, we want you to do X, Y, and Z because I'm now ready to do, A, B, and C on the property, the town's just gonna have to go do it, right?
Another thing that's gonna come up is someone's gonna say, well, what about the orchard in Leominster that the town owns?
It's a nonprofit. Well, who wants to go start a nonprofit? Go ahead.
Well,
Like,
no, I mean, we need a good answer for that, because people are gonna say, there are a whole bunch of not-for-profit or municipally owned farms around.
So
Why can't we do the same
all the
thing?
leased orchards I've seen were leased when they're in very, very good shape.
Okay,
I think we had an
Exactly.
opportunity, and Charlie Auger being a good case, he made a good go of it for a few years there because he got it in halfway decent shape.
mhm.
So I forget the guy over in Westwood who runs their orchard. He got it in great shape. You didn't have to put $1.7 million with no trees and no income for, 3 to 8 years, depending on the trees you put in.
Okay,
Yeah, I mean, there are and I'll just use Waltham Community Fields and Newton Community Farm, that is municipally owned land. However, the nonprofit runs that farm, and the municipalities, even at Medway Farm, they have forced Waltham Community Farm to put in and landscape some very, very expensive irrigation and electricity stuff that meets municipal things, and they've had to do big capital campaigns to meet that, which is not their mission focus.
And it's considerably smaller than this
Yeah,
property.
and I remember I was at Newton Community Farm, and they needed things done, and the town's nope, we're not gonna pay for them, and now they're stuck with, either poor equipment, or equipment that needs to be removed, or things that need to be done, and they're farming without the real resources that they need, and that's impacting their organization.
okay.
So,
And again,
Yep. So I
all
think
those
when we go
nonprofits had
on,
access to this RFI and none of them replied.
right. So I think to just keep this process moving for Matt's next slide in terms of money or tax dollars, I don't know if we want to let people know just what our cost is just for mowing, and we've done no upkeeps. So I'm not sure what you want to put on slide 9 for capital improvements and operating costs. So I think we really need to come from a fiscal standpoint that we didn't put anything in the budget for next year.
Yeah. So I'm gonna put in a list of what we need, a list of things that we need to do, like mowing, pruning, spraying, the house renovation, maintenance on the barn and all the buildings, and a total and a cost for replacing the trees. I'm gonna put a bottom line cost of an estimate of $1.5 to $2 million.
Yeah,
Of
I
investment.
did a.
Yeah, Matt, I wouldn't put in pruning.
The challenge with
Yeah, I wouldn't.
doing a one-time renovation is it doesn't drive home the upkeep costs on an annual basis.
Yeah.
And the investment, when you need new trees and new varieties, and that's where we lost with Charlie.
Fair enough, but then
Don't
again,
use the
if you,
word pruning, though.
okay, I won't. But then I think if, you know, the idea being if you put in that money, you would have a source of income that would hopefully have the place break even going forward, right?
But in how many years?
No, I understand, like, I'm trying to
I guess where I'm coming from is if you have 5 people that are running the orchard, and if you took something along the lines of a highway department employee, they're working outside at all times of the year, in all kinds of weather, operating heavy equipment. That's the closest thing that I can come up with for a comparison. That if there were a town employee, that's probably somewhere around $100,000 a year in salary and benefits.
Yeah.
So if you have 5 of them, that's $500,000 a year on payroll without any supplies or input costs, equipment, et cetera.
Yeah,
And that's, I think, an important thing because that's recurring. And
yeah.
you have to do that for a number of years before you started to generate a profit.
Yeah, and I don't think people really understand how expensive farming truly actually is. Like,
But I need a way to say that in about 15 seconds, right? Because we're gonna need to either answer that question or put it into this slide deck, and I'm aiming for 5 minutes on this
So
slide.
1.5 to 2 million to renovate, and then at least $500,000 in salary alone to run it.
Okay, that's a good way to put it.
Long way around.
Yeah.
We needed to say it to get there, though.
All right, fair enough.
do you have any other, as a farmer, as a dairy farmer, do you think there are any questions and concerns that might come up from the public that we should try to like get ahead of, other than the physical costs of running a farm?
Just the market changes and addressing, like, I mean, Brad's brought up different, different styles, kinds of trees, varieties and what have you, and there needs to be an understanding that the market is going to change and it's a constant evolutionary process that, what works for this 5 years, right, when you get the trees to start, paying their way, the market could change.
Right. Macintosh, who wants Macintosh?
Right,
Yeah,
but do we, but Will, what about even the talk of these ferocious storms that we're having? When you mentioned climate change, look at the Georgia peaches last year with their crop. They were just one frost away and took out, a vast majority of the whole crop for the whole state. So people have to understand, like, we're just one season away or one hurricane away from losing all your profits.
Well, it's not just Georgia. We've seen it here in 2 of the last 3 years. We've had freezes when the buds are broken and lost.
Yep.
I think the Historical Society has a peach cobbler social, and they had an apple cobbler social a couple of years ago for that very reason.
And talking last night with
Right.
Bruce Carlson, I think that Honeypot Hill over in Stowe is on the edge of whether or not they had some loss from the freeze the other night, and Bruce had to check a number of buds, and he was finding some damage, but it might not be a complete, there's not every bud on the tree. So there's.
But it'll impact the yield, right?
Well, and even then, pick your own. You've got maybe 5 weekends when you actually have a market. If it rains, I mean, one of the biggest complaints I've heard about orchard growers when the Patriots play a Sunday afternoon game, nobody picks apples on those Sundays.
Yeah, I think the
I
other
think
piece of
it's
it
worth
is.
putting climate in there.
Okay.
Oh my God, climate.
Kristen, did you have something?
I just think farmers have to deal with so many uncontrollable variables and to navigate that. So, that's one of the things I'm not sure people realize when you're contingent upon the weather, people.
Yeah, and
Labor costs.
And, yeah.
Yeah, I think,
Releasing by the farmers.
yeah, and I think the other thing is if you lease it, right, and the farmer says, okay, well, I need this, this, and this, and the town wants to pay for it, and then the farmer in the town is now like, we're not gonna pay, and he's like, you gotta pay, and the guy or the person is like, well, I'm out, I'm gonna, this is my last year of farming, I'm gonna leave, and then you find someone else to come and lease, and they're like, well, my farm plan is totally different, I'm not using that, I'm not using that, I now want you to install this thing, and, then the town's like, just like constantly sinking money into like a changing cycle of potential farmers and their farm business
Or not
plans.
sinking money in and making it a viable farm.
Yeah,
So-
and then like, quite frankly, like, how does Will and Jamie and the Matheson family feel about like the town sinking money into this farm, but not like subsidizing your farms?
I mean, to be perfectly honest, it sends difficult message to people that are actively farming and keeping land open if their taxes are going up to subsidize a kind of defunct operation. One of the most cost-effective ways to keep the land open is to keep a farmer on it, and increasing the taxes for the other farmers is not a.
Yeah, it doesn't do your farm businesses any good.
Especially if it's the orchard would be something different than my operation, but if it's also competing with another local farm and they're having to subsidize that, that's.
I used to go to tree fruit growers meetings, and I'd hate to tell people I was from Littleton, because they'd all complain about, "That guy he doesn't pay for the house, he doesn't pay for the orchard, I'm paying taxes."
He doesn't pay taxes, which is.
Right.
Yeah.
He's not paying his people.
I think to circle back to the financial overview, I think, are we going before or after FinCom?
After the budget.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. So FinCom is gonna put the town's economic outlook into perspective for everybody. I think that'll help. But I think it's worth pointing out, if we need to, that every town surrounding ours is, in the midst of an override battle right now. There's no reason to think that Littleton is going to be immune to those pressures forever. I think FinCom will be explaining that we're not. And to add, $2 million worth of upfront costs alone is irresponsible.
Right, that's a great point
Good
here.
point.
And when it undermines our existing farms that have been here for like generations.
Yeah, that's another good point.
Matheson's was a king's grant,
Oh, I'm sorry, oh, it was,
Literally.
literally.
the King of England.
The prevailing, I found a prevailing wage for a tree remover.
Okay.
Most recently that I can find online was $60 an hour.
Yeah.
Time for a career change.
And when we got estimates to have the original pruning done, I mean, we got estimates for like $100,000 to prune just that one field. Sarah, what number is it? The 201-A, which is the part that runs around along Nagog Hill Road, that big section. And we went with the cheapest option, and I guess there's some debate whether they did a good job, but then we had to have volunteers come and pull the limbs out, like, the guys smoke like the Rolling Stones guys, like, it's like, who are you?
Next slide.
That's it, actually.
All right, well,
Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah. So thanks for the notes. I will go back and do another version of this. And, I think that's it.
Okay, so next we have other business, and Matthew, you had a document you wanted us to review on the business.
Yes, and I can, if you'd like, I can also.
I think it's on the desktop, but as long as you're up there and sharing the screens, it might be easier.
Sharing the screen. So,
I can,
nope, make that go away. It's on the desktop.
if you want, I can join again and share my screen.
Okay.
Is that, you want that?
Yeah, that's gonna be easier than everyone having to watch me like.
Okay, here we go. You're gonna have to let me in again and make me a co-host, because I left the meeting.
A minute.
Okay. Can you make me co-host?
Sorry, I have to find you. Where are you? Oh, there you
At the
were.
top.
Thank you. Sorry, there's so much to read. Make a co-host. Sorry. Did I hit it?
Mm-mm.
Now I'm like in a panic of Matt Nordhaus. I keep like hitting buttons. Remove pin.
Open the participants on the bottom, click on that, the thing that says participants, and you'll see all of us, and then you can promote me from there.
Okay. Thank you for helping me. You're welcome, me, good co-host. Yes. That was painful to watch. I'm sorry.
Here's my, still better than having to come in here, so.
So, we spoke at the last select board meeting, which was a week ago Monday. We talked about a MOU between this group and the select board to sort of codify the cooperation between the two boards and the public nature of the decision when we pick a purchaser. And so, this is essentially, I want to, I would very much like to have this finalized before town meeting so that we can say to the people who are concerned about the process, we have a document here that the select board is going to follow the lead of the Orchard Working Group, however we want to phrase it here. And we will make sure that the decision on the purchaser is public, and part of an open meeting, and that the process is as transparent as we can make it. So the parties agree. If the town authorizes the disposition of the property, then the select board authorizes the working group to prepare and issue the RFP. We'll prepare the RFP in conformance with all legal requirements. We'll hold 2 community input sessions with assistance from an outside facilitator to help craft the evaluation criteria that will be utilized within the RFP. All members of the working group will meet in open session to review and evaluate the submitted criteria. The rankings of each member will be tallied together. The most advantageous proposal will be recommended to the select board. Obviously, it's got an APR on it when it's sold. It'll be subject to any other restrictions. We may, and this is something we should discuss after this, we may, by a majority vote, ask the select board to appoint 2 additional resident members. And I'm going to come back to that because we talked about something different at our last meeting, but then the select board had a slightly different take on it. And then that's basically the sum of the MOU. So on that last point, it was interesting because I think we all agreed we would add 2 members, but the select board stated, do you have the expertise to make the decision? And I had to say, yes, we do have the expertise. And I think their take on it was, why do you need to add more members if you have the expertise? They would be advisory. You were already going to use the public as an advisory member. And so I think it becomes primarily pro forma, like an optics thing. Like we're going to add people because we said we wanted more input, but it's not necessarily going to add, value to the process. So I left it as we may or may not add 2 members. We can still do it, and if this board's pleasure to add 2 more members, I have no objection to it at all. But I thought I would bring that up as the conversation we had at the select board meeting.
And then I would say what this document doesn't make us decide that.
Right.
What this document does is say that if we do decide that, the select board will do it.
So I don't think we need to get into whether we want to appoint somebody now or not, but I like having the option and because it's laid out, so I'm personally fine with the way it's worded.
Okay.
I will, for the record. I think we should add a couple people, but an optics reason to get neighbors, but
Okay.
I think for now, we can just say we've got the option.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of like additional expertise, like someone who has horticultural experience or someone who maybe makes out commercial loans to look at like the finance side. Maybe there's someone who ranches, actually no, you're the only one, and Jamie, who ranch animals in town, unless we let someone outside of town. Anyways, moving on. Maybe someone who
Right.
was a hydrologist or someone who was a soil scientist.
The other thing I'd say to that, we brought this whole issue up because we wanted the neighbors and the citizens to have more of a voice in this. So I'm not sure especially we don't have a lot of that expertise in town. I remember we brought this issue up basically to have more voices from the community represented here. So.
I support the way it is written. Can I, Matthew, make a change on page 1?
Yep.
Under recitals in the second line, it says, whereas the property has been vacant without active farming since 2001, it should say
That's wrong.
2021.
Yep, I will make that correction. Thank you for catching that.
And then if you follow 4 more down, it says, whereas the responses to the RFI indicated that the majority of strong candidates, blah, 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 property in active agricultural use preferred to acquire the parcel. It says singular, it should be plural, parcels
Okay.
by sale.
Good.
And then
I will do that as well.
my only question up top in the first paragraph, we diligently go through the Littleton assessor's maps. There are 6 separate parcels. However, on the slide that we project, it has 5 parcels. So I don't know if we have to get into the weeds of cross-checking those, because obviously you've got town map numbers. Your R numbers don't align with what we have as a lot number. So that's just more of a question.
I think one of them is split, but I mean, at some point, so I made sure that the map in the warrant matched the description in the APR, I believe, or.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Those documentation there. So I'm gonna let these, I'm gonna let the tax, yeah.
Yep. Those are my only edits. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Matthew, at one point you say, with the response they are going to give the majority of strong candidates to manage the property. I would argue all of them did. We did have one who was qualified to farm, but they were looking for the town to put a lot of money into it.
Mhm.
To me, that did make them a strong candidate.
Okay.
They could farm, I agree with that, but the town wasn't going to put the money in they needed. So I would, and that's been questioned. Well, we have one candidate who wants to lease it. Why don't we do it? And we have a reason why that person wasn't so strong. So I think I would say all. I don't want to speak for everybody, but I would.
I'm okay with changing that.
Okay, I think that's reasonable.
Okay.
Yeah, and they know, that we're putting the RFP out for purchase. So if they want to change their position, they can.
Yeah.
So.
Do you need a motion to support this MOU?
Yep.
Can we?
I think we should officially endorse this MOU.
Can we though if it wasn't on the agenda?
Oh,
It went
Well, we
in
can-
as discussion item.
Went into other
it went into other
business.
business. It's probably better not to do a motion unless it's on the agenda.
I think, can we?
Can we do something non-binding that shows that we
Consensus of
support it?
support or something, some sort of,
Right.
and then
Yep,
can we
support.
meet again to vote?
I support that.
How about we move to, meet again in however many days we need to vote on this?
Just for a Zoom session, just to vote on this one thing?
Yeah.
Right,
Okay, that's fine with me.
right, so we need what, 2 days posted?
Yeah, 2 days, so.
Another
Like,
Friday
to them,
afternoon.
what I'm doing tomorrow.
It would need to be at
It
least
needs
2
to be
business
Monday would be
days,
the earliest
yeah.
we could do it.
So Monday or after. Does anybody have strong preferences?
What were
Anytime
the
after, like-
options, Karen?
Right now we're looking at what day next week works best for everybody and we'll go from there. Or if there's any days that don't work next week at all.
Well, we probably want to do it before town meeting.
Oh, yeah, there's that.
So we want to do it
Monday?
Monday or Tuesday. I can do it.
How
pretty
does
much.
everybody's Monday look?
What time?
I'm good all day.
I can't do noon.
How about 11 a.m.? Could everybody call and do an 11 a.m.?
I can't.
11 works for me.
No? No to Amy?
Yeah.
Amy, what would work for you?
Um,
Anything close around?
in the morning, like earlier,
Could we do
like
9 or 10?
9 or 10 would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
9 or 10, Sarah?
Yep, that's fine.
You make the call, Karen.
All right, we'll be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed at
All
9 a.m.,
Awesome.
folks.
Okay, so I'll contact this clerk tomorrow morning and set up an agenda for
Okay.
9 a.m. Monday.
And I
So
believe
can
it'll
I-
just be this.
Can I ask one thing, Matthew? Would you want to have that if you needed to run through anything with your slide deck, that could be at least an agenda item as well, whether we need it or not, it's posted?
Good call. That's a good
I'll
call.
put it on the agenda. If you feel like you need input, we can put it up.
Okay, so just 2 items, the MOU and the presentation. Yeah, that's great. That should be a quick one.
Okay.
Thank you. That's the last
Well,
item I
thank you
have.
for doing all that work on this. Any other business? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, thank you, everybody.
Bye, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Bye.
Let's go over to Catherine.
So Monday at 9, right?
Monday at
Monday
9.
at 9.
Okay.